She was the kind of woman people admired. A powerful Texas judge. Respected. Fear. The kind of woman who could decide a man's fate with the bang of a gavel. But behind closed doors, she was a woman trapped. Trapped in a life she didn't want. Trapped in a marriage built on lies. And when the man she called her husband pushed her too far, the woman who once upheld the law decided to break it in the most shocking way imaginable. This is not just a story about betrayal. It's a story about control, desperation, and a deadly secret that was never supposed to come out. A secret so dangerous that when it was finally exposed, someone had to die. A respected judge, a devoted husband, a hidden affair, and a murder that shook the legal world. But was it cold-blooded murder? Or was it years of fear and oppression finally boiling over? Was she a monster, or a woman pushed to her breaking point? Before we jump into this incredible story, take a moment to comment below where you're tuning in from. And don't forget to like and subscribe for more gripping stories that will leave a lasting impression. Your support helps us bring these powerful cases to light and share them with the world. Stay with us because by the end of this story, you just might see justice in a whole new way. Power, respect, control. That's what people saw when they looked at Judge Olivia Hayes. She wasn't just another name in the Texas legal system. She was a force. A woman who stood at the bench, eyes sharp, voice steady, handing down sentences without fear. The kind of judge criminals dreaded and lawyers admired. She built her career on discipline, on fairness, on the belief that justice must always be served. In court, she was untouchable. A woman who could not be shaken. But outside that courtroom, she was a prisoner in her own life. Olivia was the perfect example of success. A woman who had fought her way to the top in a world dominated by men. She had spent over a decade sentencing the worst of the worst, murderers, abusers, criminals who thought they were above the law. People called her fearless. A role model. A woman who never let emotions cloud her judgment. But what they didn't know, what no one could ever know, was that Olivia had spent her entire life hiding the deepest, most painful truth about herself. A truth she had been taught to fear. A truth that could destroy everything she worked for. Olivia was born into a world where image was everything. Her family was strict, conservative, and deeply religious. They believed in rules, in tradition, in doing what was expected, no matter the cost. And from the time she was a little girl, Olivia understood that there were certain things she could never say. Certain feelings she had to bury. Because in her world, being different was dangerous. So she did what was expected. She played the part. She smiled at the right moments. She spoke when spoken to. And when it was time to marry, she chose the safest option, Eric Lawson. A successful financial analyst. A man who looked good on paper. A man who gave her the perfect image of a devoted wife and husband. A man who could help her climb higher. But he was never the man she wanted. Because Olivia's heart had always belonged to someone else. Rachel Morgan. Rachel wasn't just a friend. She was Olivia's everything. The one person who made her feel alive. The one person who saw past the mask. They had met in college, two young women with dreams bigger than the world would allow. But while Rachel had the freedom to live her truth, Olivia did not. She made a choice. She chose power over passion. Security over love. She walked away from the one person who made her happy and stepped into a life that wasn't hers. A life where she played the role of a perfect wife, while her heart stayed with Rachel in the shadows. For years, Olivia lived in two worlds. By day, she was the judge everyone respected. The woman in the black robe who controlled the fates of others. By night, she was someone else. A woman sneaking stolen moments with the only person she had ever truly loved. A woman lying to her husband, lying to the world, lying to herself. And as much as she tried to pretend, as much as she convinced herself she could have it both ways, the truth was always there. Waiting. Building. Like a storm on the horizon. But storms don't wait forever. And when the winds finally changed, when the truth started to slip through the cracks, everything Olivia had built was about to come crashing down. And when it did, someone would pay the ultimate price. Eric Lawson was a man who liked order. Control. A world that made sense. He built his life on numbers, strategies, and careful planning. Nothing happened by accident. Everything had a purpose. That's why he was so successful in the business world. He understood risk. He knew how to manage it, how to keep things running smoothly, how to avoid surprises. And for the longest time, he believed he had done the same with his marriage. To the outside world, Eric had everything. A high-paying job. A beautiful home. A wife who was one of the most respected judges in Texas. People looked at him and saw a man who had won at life. The perfect husband, the powerful wife. They were a couple others admired, envied even. But behind closed doors, their marriage was different. Not broken, just empty, quiet, routine. Eric had never been the kind of man who needed grand, sweeping romance. Love, to him, was about partnership, stability, a relationship that looked good, worked well, and made sense. And for years, his marriage to Olivia did just that. She was driven, ambitious, focused, just like him. They had the same goals, the same values, the same understanding of what a successful life should be. He was proud of her. He admired her. But love, passion, that was never really part of the equation. It wasn't that their marriage was bad. It was just practical. They had dinner together, went to events together, played their roles as husband and wife. But there was a distance between them that he could never quite close. A coldness he didn't understand. At first, he told himself it was just the way Olivia was, strong, serious, not one for emotional displays. But over the years, he started to notice little things. The way her mind always seemed somewhere else. The way she pulled away when he tried to touch her. The way she always had an excuse. Late nights at work. Court cases that needed her full attention. Stress, exhaustion, anything but the truth. And Eric trusted her. Why wouldn't he? Olivia wasn't the kind of woman who lied. She was a judge, for God's sake. A woman of honor, of integrity. She had spent her entire career making sure the guilty were held accountable. She was the last person he would ever suspect of hiding something. So he ignored the nagging feeling in the back of his mind. He convinced himself it was all in his head. That whatever was missing in their marriage was just part of life, part of getting older, part of the sacrifices that came with two people chasing success. But no matter how much he tried to push it away, the cracks were always there. Growing, spreading, silent but dangerous. And Eric didn't see it. He didn't see how deep they ran. He didn't see the truth hiding right in front of him. Not until the night everything changed. The night the lies unraveled. The night Eric realized that the woman he had spent his life trusting had never really been his at all. Eric Lawson had always been a man who liked routine, structure, knowing what to expect. That's how he had built his career, his life, his marriage. Everything in its place, everything under control. But on this night, control slipped through his fingers like sand. And nothing would ever be the same again. The business trip was supposed to last 3 days. A quick flight to Chicago, meetings with investors, a hotel stay, then back home like always. But fate had other plans. A storm rolled in. Flights were grounded. The trip was canceled. And so, Eric did what any husband would do. He decided to go home. He thought Olivia would be happy to see him. Maybe she had already gone to bed, maybe she was still up, reading one of her law books. Either way, he would walk in, surprise her, and they would share a quiet evening together. Just the two of them. That's what he thought. Instead, he stepped through the front door and instantly knew something was wrong. The house was quiet, too quiet. No TV, no music, just the faintest sound coming from upstairs. Laughter? A whisper? It was strange. Olivia never had company this late. His heart thumped harder, and without even knowing why, his body tensed. He set his bag down gently, took off his coat slowly, every movement careful, measured, as if some part of him already sensed what was coming. Step by step, he made his way upstairs. The closer he got to the bedroom, the more his stomach twisted. The door was slightly open. Light spilled into the hallway. And then he heard it, a soft giggle followed by a low, hushed voice. A voice that did not belong to him. A voice that was not supposed to be in his house. Eric pushed the door open, and his world stopped. There, tangled in the sheets of their marriage bed, was Olivia and Rachel Morgan. For a moment, time didn't move. His brain refused to understand what his eyes were seeing. Olivia, his Olivia, was lying in bed, her arms wrapped around another woman. Their bodies close. Their skin pressed together. Their faces, flushed, full of something he had never seen in her before. It hit him like a punch to the gut. A sharp, deep pain that knocked the air from his lungs. His wife, the woman he had trusted, the woman he had built a life with, had been lying to him. For years, maybe forever. Eric. Olivia's voice snapped through the room like a gunshot. She scrambled up, yanking the blanket over herself, eyes wide with panic. Rachel sat frozen, her face drained of color. For a second, none of them spoke. The silence was suffocating. The weight of the truth pressed down on all of them, too heavy to escape. Rachel was the first to move. She reached for him, her voice trembling. "Eric, please, let's just talk. This doesn't have to." "Stop." His own voice surprised him. It was flat, cold, empty. A part of him expected to feel rage, to yell, to break something, to demand answers. But all he felt was nothing. Just a hollow, aching nothingness. He looked at Olivia and she looked back at him, her lips parted, her hands shaking. And for the first time in their marriage, Eric saw her clearly. Not as the woman he thought she was. Not as his wife. But as a stranger. A stranger who had been lying to him, deceiving him, using him. She opened her mouth to speak, but he turned away before she could. He walked out of the bedroom, down the stairs, through the front door. And as the night swallowed him whole, one thought echoed in his mind over and over again. Nothing will ever be the same again. Eric stood outside in the cold night air, his hands clenched into fists, his mind racing. He should have walked away. He should have gotten in his car, driven off, never looked back. But as he stood there, staring at the dark sky above, something twisted inside him. This wasn't just about betrayal. This was about power. Control. And for the first time in his life, Eric Lawson realized he held all of it in his hands. When he finally walked back inside, Olivia and Rachel were still in the bedroom. The air was thick with tension. Olivia sat on the edge of the bed, gripping the blanket so tightly her knuckles had turned white. Rachel stood near the dresser, arms crossed, her face hard, unreadable. Neither of them spoke as Eric shut the door behind him and leaned against it. You think I'm going to pack my bags and disappear? His voice was calm, too calm. You think I'm just going to let this slide? No, that's not how this works. Rachel stiffened. Olivia swallowed hard, her eyes darting between them. Eric could see the fear in her face, the desperation. And he liked it. Eric, please? Olivia's voice was barely a whisper. He ignored her. He stepped closer, his eyes locked onto hers, and then, in the coldest, most calculated tone he had ever used, he made his demand. You want to keep your career? Your reputation? Then I want in. Rachel's entire body jerked, like she had been slapped. Her mouth fell open in disgust. What? Eric smiled. A slow, deliberate smile that made Rachel's stomach turn. I know what this would do to you, Olivia. To your career. Your precious reputation. One word from me and it's over. The Honorable Judge Olivia Hayes? A fraud. A liar. A woman who spent years preaching about justice while sneaking around behind her husband's back. It would be a scandal. You'd lose everything. Olivia's breath came faster, her chest rising and falling like she was struggling to breathe. Eric leaned in closer, lowering his voice to a near whisper. Unless you do what I say. No, Rachel snapped, stepping between them. This is sick. You can't do this. Can't I? Eric raised an eyebrow. Tell me, Rachel, how many cases has Olivia ruled on where reputation meant everything? How many times has she seen a public figure destroyed by a single scandal? And you think she's going to risk it all, for you? Rachel turned to Olivia, her eyes pleading. You're not actually considering this? Olivia didn't answer. Her face was pale, her hands trembling. She looked at Rachel, then at Eric, then back at Rachel. And in that moment, Rachel saw something in Olivia's eyes that broke her heart. Defeat. Olivia. Rachel whispered. No. But Olivia wasn't looking at her anymore. She was staring at the floor, her jaw clenched, her body stiff. The woman who had always been so strong, so unshakable, was crumbling right in front of her. I don't have a choice. Rachel's breath caught in her throat. Yes, you do. You always have a choice. Not this time. Olivia's voice was hollow. Empty. Eric exhaled slowly, satisfied. That's what I thought. Rachel's hands balled into fists. You're disgusting. And you? Eric smirked. You're leaving. Rachel's chest tightened. Olivia? But Olivia didn't look at her. She couldn't. That night, Olivia did what Eric demanded. And that night, Rachel felt something inside her die. By morning she was gone. No goodbye. No note. No trace of where she went. Just gone. And Olivia? She had never felt more alone in her entire life. Days passed. Then weeks. And Rachel never called. Never texted. Never answered a single message. It was like she had vanished into thin air. Olivia checked her phone every morning, every night, every hour in between. Nothing. No missed calls. No voicemails. Just silence. A deep, empty silence that felt heavier than anything she had ever known. Her life had always been controlled. She was a judge. She made decisions. She held power. But now, she had none. She was a prisoner in her own home, in her own life. And Eric? He was thriving. At first, he barely spoke to her, acting as if everything that happened was normal, like their marriage was just the same as before. But then the taunting began. You look tired, Olivia. He'd say it with a smirk. Losing sleep. She'd ignore him. She had to. But he wouldn't stop. You miss her, don't you? Poor Olivia. Must be so lonely without her little secret. Her hands would clench into fists, nails digging into her palms, but she wouldn't say a word. She refused to give him the satisfaction. Then he got bolder. He'd touch her shoulder in the kitchen, lean in close when she tried to eat, whisper things in her ear that made her skin crawl. You belong to me now. You're never getting out of this. You think Rachel's coming back? She's not. You lost her. And you only have yourself to blame. Every day Olivia felt herself breaking a little more. She had spent her whole life building a reputation, a career, a future. But none of it mattered now. None of it could save her. She had never truly loved Eric. He had always been a shield, a way to survive in a world that wouldn't accept who she really was. But now he wasn't just a shield, he was a cage. And then one night as she lay in bed staring at the ceiling, a single terrifying thought slipped into her mind. As long as Eric is alive, I will never be free. The thought scared her. It should have made her sick. But instead, it sat there, heavy and still, like a dark truth she had always known but never dared to face. Eric had taken everything from her. Her love, her choices, her life. And if she wanted it back, she would have to take something from him too. Olivia had spent years studying crime, studying criminals. She knew what made them slip up. She knew what got them caught. It was always the same, sloppy mistakes, rushed plans, reckless emotions. But she wasn't going to be like them. No, if she did this, she had to be perfect. She had to be careful, precise, unbreakable. Eric was always watching her, always reminding her who held the power. But what he didn't know was that Olivia had already made up her mind. She wasn't going to live like this. Not for another month. Not for another week. Not for another day. She spent nights researching, buried in old case files, medical reports, anything that could lead her to the answer. And then she found it, succinylcholine, a near undetectable paralytic agent. A single dose would silence every muscle in the body, making it impossible to move, impossible to scream. Within minutes the heart would stop. And by the time anyone found the body, it would look like a natural heart attack. No forced entry. No signs of struggle. Just a tragic, sudden death. It was perfect. She ordered a small vial from an underground supplier. Cash payment, no paper trail, no questions asked. And then she practiced. She rehearsed every single detail in her mind, over and over again. She practiced her reaction in the mirror, wide, shocked eyes, trembling hands, breathless panic. The perfect widow. The devastated wife. The woman who had just lost the man she loved. Oh my God. Eric. Eric, wake up. She'd clutch at the sheets, shake the pillow, grab her phone with shaky fingers. Please? Somebody help him. She perfected the way she would dial 911, the way her voice would crack when she spoke to the operator. She even practiced the exact moment she would break down sobbing when the paramedics arrived, just to make sure they never suspected a thing. And then, the final step. The moment she had been waiting for. The night arrived. Eric sat in his usual chair, swirling his glass of whiskey like he didn't have a single care in the world. He smirked at her the way he always did, eyes full of control, full of power. The same eyes that had haunted her for weeks. What's wrong, Olivia? You seem nervous, he taunted, tilting his head as he took a slow sip. Afraid you'll never hear from Rachel again? She forced a small smile, steadying her hands as she walked toward him. She had already poured the drink. The vial was already empty. There was no going back now. Drink up, Eric, she whispered, watching as he lifted the glass to his lips. 1 sip. 2 sips. And then, the waiting began. The glass was in his hand. The poison was already inside him. All Olivia had to do now was wait. Eric smirked, taking a slow sip of his whiskey, completely unaware of what was about to happen. He leaned back in his chair, stretching his legs like a man who believed he had all the power in the world. You know, Olivia, he said, swirling the amber liquid in his glass, I was thinking, maybe we should make this a regular thing. I mean, I've got to admit, I'm enjoying this arrangement. He laughed. That cold, cruel laugh that had haunted Olivia for weeks. For months. For years. Her stomach twisted, but she forced herself to stay calm. She just nodded, watching him. Waiting. He took another sip. Then another. And then, it began. It started with a small twitch in his fingers. A tiny, almost unnoticeable shake as he set his glass down on the table. His brow furrowed, his lips parting like he was about to say something. But the words never came. His breathing hitched. His hand jerked suddenly, knocking over the glass. It clattered onto the hardwood floor, whiskey spilling everywhere. Eric tried to move, but his body wouldn't listen. His eyes shot to Olivia, wide with confusion, then with terror. "Oh, Olivia." His voice was barely a whisper, choked and weak. Asterisk. He tried to lift his arm to push himself up, but his muscles had already given up on him. His legs kicked slightly, then stiffened. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. No scream. No cry for help. He was paralyzed. The realization hit him all at once. His pupils blew wide, his face contorting in pure, raw fear. He struggled, but it was useless. His body no longer belonged to him. Olivia just stood there watching. Her hands were folded neatly in front of her. She didn't blink. She didn't move. She had dreamed of this moment, imagined it over and over again. But now, as she watched the man who had controlled her, tormented her, shattered the life she wanted, she felt nothing. Eric's breaths turned to gasps, shallow and desperate. His chest barely moved. His lips trembled, his face turning red, then blue. Then his eyes locked onto hers. He wasn't smirking anymore. He wasn't laughing. He was begging. "Please, please don't let me die." But Olivia didn't move. She didn't reach for him. She didn't say a word. She just waited. And then he was still. The glass lay shattered on the floor. The whiskey stains spread like a dark shadow around his lifeless hand. The room was silent. Olivia exhaled, slow and steady. Then she went to work. She grabbed a clean towel and carefully wiped the rim of the glass, erasing any trace of what had been inside. She flushed the vial, making sure no trace of the drug remained. She checked her reflection in the hallway mirror. Her face had to be perfect, her expression just right. Then she grabbed her phone and dialed 911. Her voice trembled just enough to sound real. Just enough to sell the performance. "Please? My husband, he just collapsed. I think it's a heart attack." She let out a breathless sob, shaking as she spoke. "Oh God, please hurry." And just like that, Olivia Hayes, the brilliant, respected judge, became something else entirely. A widow. A victim. And the mastermind behind the perfect crime. Eric Lawson was dead. And the world wept for him. The news spread fast. A sudden heart attack. A tragedy. A man gone too soon. The devoted husband of a respected judge, taken in the prime of his life. People sent flowers. Reporters covered the story. The headlines painted Olivia as a grieving widow, a woman who had lost the love of her life. Judge Hayes suffers heartbreaking loss. Community rallies around beloved judge after husband's tragic passing. A love story cut short by fate. On camera, Olivia looked broken. Her eyes were red, her voice barely above a whisper. She clutched Eric's wedding photo during interviews, her fingers trembling just enough to be believable. She wore black. She dabbed her eyes with a tissue. She played her part flawlessly. And everyone believed her. At the funeral, people whispered about how strong she was. How much Eric had loved her. How tragic it was to lose such a wonderful man. Olivia nodded, accepted their condolences, let them hug her, let them tell her how sorry they were. She stood by Eric's casket, listening to eulogies about what a great husband he had been, how much he had meant to everyone who knew him. Inside she felt nothing. She had done it. She had freed herself. And no one suspected a thing. The coroner's report arrived. Cardiac arrest. No signs of foul play. The case was closed. Olivia could finally breathe again. The nightmare was over. Or so she thought. Because in the crowd, standing quietly near the back, was a man who wasn't convinced. Detective Marcus Reed had seen a lot in his 30 years on the force. Murderers who cried fake tears. Victims who weren't as innocent as they seemed. Families who swore they knew their loved ones, until the truth proved them wrong. And now he was looking at Olivia Hayes. Something about her story didn't sit right. Something about Eric's death felt off. Oh, the reports all said the same thing. Natural causes, a tragic loss, a sudden heart attack. The coroner didn't question it. The media didn't question it. Even Eric's business partners accepted it without hesitation. But Marcus Reed? He trusted his gut. And his gut told him Olivia Hayes wasn't a grieving widow. She was a liar. So he started digging. He looked at Eric's medical history. No heart problems. No warnings. A man in decent shape who just happened to drop dead? Possible, but unusual. He spoke to colleagues, friends, business associates. And then he found Rachel Morgan. Rachel, who had vanished from Olivia's life after that night. Rachel, who had spent weeks drowning in guilt, in regret, in heartbreak. Rachel, who, without even realizing it, made the one mistake Olivia had feared the most. Eric was supposed to be out of town that night. Rachel said it so casually, so offhandedly, like it didn't mean anything. But Marcus Reed caught it instantly. Eric wasn't supposed to be home that night. He wasn't supposed to walk through that door. He wasn't supposed to be there at all. So why? Was Olivia prepared to serve him a fresh glass of whiskey? Reed leaned back in his chair, tapping his pen against his notepad. He had seen plenty of perfect crimes before. And in every single one of them there was always one slip-up. This was Olivia's. He picked up the phone and made the call. "I want a secondary toxicology test on Eric Lawson." The case wasn't closed after all. The test results came back. And with them, Olivia Hayes' perfect world crumbled. Succinylcholine. A paralytic agent. A drug that left no trace, except this time it did. Detective Marcus Reed held the toxicology report in his hands. He had seen enough criminals try to outsmart the system to know one thing: no crime was ever truly perfect. Somewhere, somehow, there was always a mistake. And Olivia had made one. The moment he stepped into her office, Olivia straightened her back. Her face was calm, her expression unreadable. She was a judge after all. She had spent years watching people break under pressure. She wasn't going to be one of them. "Detective Reed," she greeted, her voice smooth, controlled. "To what do I owe the pleasure?" Reed sat across from her. He didn't say anything right away. Instead, he slid the report across her desk. Olivia's eyes flickered to it. Her fingers twitched ever so slightly. But her face? Still a mask. "Toxicology came back," Reed said, leaning forward. "Eric didn't die of a heart attack." Silence. Olivia didn't react. Not at first. She folded her hands neatly, tilting her head just slightly. "That's quite an accusation," she said coolly. "You'll need more than that, detective." Reed smirked. He liked when they put up a fight. It made breaking them even better. "I've got more," he said, pulling out the file. Interviews. Witness statements. Rachel Morgan's testimony. That name. That was the first crack in Olivia's armor. Her jaw tightened. Her breathing hitched, so slight most people wouldn't have noticed. But Reed did. "You see, Judge Hayes, Rachel remembers that night very well," Reed continued, flipping through the pages. "She remembers Eric was supposed to be out of town. She remembers how surprised he was to find her there. And she remembers that fresh glass of whiskey sitting on your nightstand. The one you had ready, before you ever knew he'd be home." He let the words sink in. Let the weight of them settle between them like a ticking bomb. "It was an accident," Olivia finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. Reed raised an eyebrow. "No, Judge. It was murder." And just like that, the mask shattered. The courtroom was full. Cameras flashed. Reporters whispered. Every seat was taken. Everyone wanted to see the once powerful Judge Olivia Hayes on the other side of the bench. For years, she had been the one handing down sentences, deciding fates. Now, she sat in the defendant's chair, wearing a jumpsuit instead of a robe. Shackled. Powerless. The media called it the trial of the decade. Texas judge charged in husband's murder. The fall of Olivia Hayes. Secret affair, dark secrets, deadly consequences. Rachel Morgan took the stand first. Her voice shook as she told the world everything. The affair. The years of stolen moments. The night Eric found them. His sick ultimatum. And Olivia's decision, the choice that changed everything. "I begged her to leave him," Rachel said, wiping away tears. But she wouldn't. She was afraid. Of him. Of losing everything. And now Eric's dead and Olivia is here. The prosecution wasted no time tearing Olivia apart. She wasn't a victim, they argued. She was a woman scorned. She killed Eric Lawson in cold blood to protect her reputation, her career, her secret life. And she almost got away with it. But the defense had their own story to tell. Olivia Hayes spent her entire life trapped, they said. Trapped by expectations. By fear. By a husband who held her life in his hands. She wasn't a cold-blooded murderer, she was a woman pushed to the edge. The jury listened. The world watched. And then they deliberated. Hours passed. The tension in the courtroom was unbearable. Olivia sat still, her hands clenched so tightly her knuckles turned white. This was it. Her entire life, everything she had built, everything she had done, it all came down to 12 strangers. Finally the jury returned. The room fell silent as the foreman stood. "On the charge of first-degree murder, we find the defendant." Pause. "Guilty." Gasp. Whispers. Cameras flashed again. Olivia closed her eyes just for a second. And when she opened them, there was nothing left inside them. No fight. No anger. Just emptiness. The judge read her sentence. Life without parole. The same courtroom where she had once ruled with authority had now sealed her fate. The same justice system she had served had now turned on her. And as they led her away in handcuffs, Olivia Hayes, the woman who once had everything, had nothing left at all. The trial was over. The verdict had been spoken. Olivia Hayes was no longer a judge, no longer a respected woman of power. She was an inmate, nothing more. Life without parole. The words echoed in her head over and over as the cold reality of her new world settled in. The sound of heavy prison doors locking behind her. The rough fabric of her prison uniform against her skin. The cold, hard bed in a tiny cell that would be hers forever. Her name used to mean something. When people said Judge Hayes, they said it with respect, maybe even fear. Now that same name was whispered with disgust. A murderer. A liar. A fraud. And Rachel? Rachel was gone. She had vanished from the public eye, refusing to speak to reporters, refusing to be part of the scandal any longer. Olivia had lost her too. The only person she had ever truly loved. Outside the prison walls, the world kept moving. The legal system, the one she had dedicated her life to, kept going without her. Judges who once admired her now shook their heads when they heard her name. Lawyers who once wanted to be like her now used her case as a lesson on how power could corrupt. Her story had become a warning, a reminder that even the most powerful could fall. And she had fallen the hardest of all. Power. It can lift a person to the highest place. It can give them control, respect, fear. But power can also be a mask. And masks can only stay on for so long before the truth forces its way through. Olivia Hayes built her life on control. She controlled her image, her career, her emotions. She buried her secrets deep, believing no one would ever see them. But secrets have a way of rising to the surface, no matter how tightly they're buried. Eric Lawson held the power for years. He controlled Olivia, humiliated her, used her. And in the end, she took that power back in the only way she knew how. Was she a monster? Or was she just another victim? A woman pushed too far in a world that never let her be free? Justice was served. But at what cost? What do you think? Was Olivia a cold-blooded killer, or did years of oppression push her to the edge? Let us know in the comments below.